Hello, everybody. This is Fahim Jackson, and it's episode 69 of my podcast show, In the Know. This is a short form podcast show which is aimed at putting people in the know with a variety of topics, using my experiences and viewpoints in life to put people in the know. What is the know? It's using my understanding of the experiences to guide you through the world. The following is an intro speech into the topic of today, and that introduction speech is regarding the future of Zoom learning. Since the pandemic began, there has been this way of keeping our children connected to the learning environment. And initially, the schools were shut down. But as the new year came around, back in the month of September, the means of learning for a lot of students have been Zoom. Zoom is a telephony and online chat peer-to-peer service that is used for distant learning and conference calls. Since the pandemic, the stock have even risen from $36 in the beginning of 2019 to now in 2021 at nearly $400 a share. So this is a very important company to the use of Americans right now. But what happens once the pandemic ends? Because we are already seeing businesses open more and more. Living in New York City, Madison Square Garden has already opened to 10% capacity. But all this is beside the point. What shall come of all this new technological change? What is the future of Zoom education coming out of the pandemic? Pre-pandemic. Before the pandemic, the idea of having these Zoom meetings were seen as something a little too ahead of its time, and the schools and workplaces were not embracing it initially, well, at least to the degree that they are now. There's something that is still just too impersonal about having an organization have meetings over telephoning. And let's not talk about the education. How does this fare in an educational landscape? So if you were to tell people that this would be a main method of communication for an entire human civilization, people would have told you that you were crazy. I'm not even talking about in the distant past. If someone would have told you in late 2019, we would have just all written it off as an interesting piece of technology, but not fully yet to be ready to be fully embraced. But then, March of 2020, when the lockdown took place, and now people were in a position where this was their only method of communication. So, how has things panned out? Well, this is how. Pandemic. When the lockdown took place, we all didn't know what to expect. And then the days went from weeks to months. That's when companies had to make decisions whether to hire or keep people on board with their jobs. So more and more people started to use Zoom. This then became the medium by which most people conducted their business. It went from something that fewer people used months prior to the safest means of communication. Since this pandemic required people to social distance, what is more controlled than a video and audio computer screen meeting? Yet, what about the children? The children themselves needed to be taken into consideration because schools were in the process of reopening the classroom. For the longest, kids were using their computers. Well, the ones with access were using computers to perform their schoolwork during this time. Then the new school year came around and some people opened their schools. But the numbers of people with the virus spiked, and what happened? The schools went back to being closed. So Zoom became the primary usage for classes. Now, we cannot live like this forever. So we will have to figure out something because distant learning can lead to prolonged problems. And I would discuss more about that in later detail. Post-pandemic. The pandemic is still ongoing, so we don't know how this is going to affect the future yet. Now, I have some ideas as to what could take place. One of the things that could take place is a slow matriculation from Zoom back into the classroom. But at the university level, we could incorporate more students into the classroom using Zoom, meaning once everyone gets back into the class, you can bring in more via Zoom, so a lecture hall will have even more students. Now, you can't expect students to pay more money who are not physically there, but the cost will still be relatively high, I'm guessing. Now, other things that may take place in the space of academia are school teachers who may be out sick but still technically able to teach. So now the students sit in class and learn while the educator is at home. Other aspects of Zoom will be harder to understand because, like I said before, the pandemic is still ongoing. But the teachers' jobs, how the students attend courses, or even the parents' oversight, if this becomes a little more normalized, for their child to be at home learning, which could be something that the government will want to observe for their own expenditure purposes, which I will be discussing later on. Teaching views. The educator may not like the idea of this type of learning since they feel that the student should be in class in order to get full cooperation. If the kid is not face to face with a teacher, then you tend to miss those nonverbal cues that you normally get in school. See, the technology can be a little manipulated. There are students even now that have been smart enough to add photos with a screenshot to make it look like they are engaged, yet they are not. Or students that are able to make sure that they can record themselves and leave it on replay. This is very counterproductive to what the teacher is trying to accomplish. So, they are ultimately going to need the students in the classroom. Now, that is for younger students in middle school to high school. You'll have more engaged students in college. But the problem with Zoom is that you will notice that students may become restless, and that could cause more students to have less retention and lower grade point averages when they cannot focus in class. Parental views. A parent, under no circumstance, will like the idea of the Zoom education because they want their children to be out there and out of the house and into a classroom. If there was a way to learn via school, then there would be more of an ability to accept this type of learning. But the pushback would be strong if they wanted the students to be at home more. And the reason is because parents have to work, and the kids are trusted at home to attend classes and do their work, which is risky. The parent would be sitting at work all day trying to wonder what the kid is doing at home. So how do you introduce this full time? You don't. Today is different because the parent is locked in with the kid in this pandemic. But when the pandemic is over, not so much so. Even with high school students, this is still fairly risky. Child views. Staying at home sounds good, but the student at some point is going to want to interact with other students. And school is supposed to be a place where you learn interpersonal skills. Sitting in front of a computer have interactions not going to assist you because a relationship between the students gets awkward when they do finally meet. Making friends can be tough as well because you have to get to know each other once class is over. With Zoom, the class ends and you're in this space at home alone. The relationships are beyond fictitious, so we must put them in position to be in front of each other. So a lot of students are not going to embrace this themselves, as with their teachers and parents. They may think it sounds nice until classes are over and they're in their homes alone in their space of existing. Now here are my views. In my opinion, I would not be in favor of learning over Zoom in the classrooms. Or, in other words, I would not be in favor of Zoom replacing the classes. Now, there's context to everything. I gave an example earlier about using more students in the classroom through Zoom in colleges, meaning having students in the lecture hall and on Zoom simultaneously. Don't get me wrong, I would have spoken against Zoom before the pandemic, but there's just too many additional problems that are non-academic related in schools. I do think that if the company makes some adjustments to the company to make this more appealing to the parent and teacher, so that the teacher has more control, it would be more embraced because teachers, parents, and students are all getting frustrated and ready for the classroom again. So, for now, Zoom is off the table in my opinion. Governmental views. The United States government has issues with this because the expenditures for school will be lessened, which could lead to teachers being cut. And the last thing they want to do coming out of the pandemic is cutting more jobs. So you're not going to convince the system in this way. Now, what you might be able to sell them on is using less taxpayers' dollars to educate, yet it still requires that the government might make cuts. The system also doesn't know how to properly grade students who don't have to be physically in the classroom. The student could be cheating if they are remote, so how do you gauge how well students are truly performing? A market at risk. What are the new criteria for hiring some of these new Zoom teachers? Because what are their abilities since they're not in the class? Having the command over the class has different standards than being over the computer. But the biggest issue is the number of educators out of work since you can teach more students with fewer resources. So now the very best are only able to work. Since a class might have 25 or 30 kids, now you can have about 50 to 100 kids. It's digital, so the volume is more. Schools become bigger and more buildings become abandoned. That starts to affect the administrators' jobs as well. Do we need as many administrators when the technology is such where you don't need much? And these are just a few of some of the problems that could cause people to lose out in pursuing this educational space as a career. With this end statement, why we have to be open to this new way of Zoom learning. Zoom has been doing very well at performing for the people since the beginning of the pandemic. But will it last after the pandemic as it pertains to the academic space? I don't think it should last unless it is used in certain circumstances. When educators are sick, then they can use this to perform their duty. I'm looking at Zoom to replace the classroom, or maybe later on the technology will get better and then I can see things being revolutionized. Because I am watching what is going on in the world with all these vacant office buildings and companies saving money by using Zoom. This could be a little problematic because it's actually working. But with education, you won't be seeing this anytime soon because we need our students in the classroom. They need to not only work on their schoolwork, but also their interpersonal skills. Being over a computer is way too impersonal. So, thanks for listening to In the Know, and can't wait to bring the next episode where we talk about what I wish I knew and what you need to know before stepping foot on a college campus.